Gregory had a habit Sharon noticed long before she realized her marriage was in trouble. Whenever he was lying, not even serious lies at first, just the polished little omissions wealthy people called handling things, he adjusted his cufflinks like they suddenly felt too tight around his wrists. He was doing it on stage the night everything fell apart. The ballroom in Bethesda smelled like expensive perfume, candle wax, and fresh flowers that had cost more than Sharon's first apartment rent. Reporters moved between tables, pretending not to stare. Investors laughed too loudly near the back bar. Somewhere behind Sharon, somebody's phone camera kept flashing every few seconds. She was 7 months pregnant and exhausted enough that she'd quietly slipped her heels off beneath the table an hour earlier. Her ankles were swollen. Her lower back hurt. The baby had been pressing against her ribs all evening while she handled last-minute staff problems from her phone, because that was who Sharon had always been, the person who kept disasters from becoming visible. Then Gregory reached for the microphone and touched his cufflinks. Once, twice, Sharon felt something cold move through her stomach before he even spoke. Not because she knew exactly what was coming, because she knew him. Gregory looked calm to everybody else in the room, controlled, polished, billionaire composed, but Sharon could see the tension sitting underneath his jaw, the way his shoulders locked too tightly whenever he was about to say something he couldn't take back. Then he started talking about their marriage, and the room changed, not loudly at first, quietly, like people could sense humiliation before they fully understood it. Sharon didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even realize she'd stopped breathing properly until the baby tightened painfully inside her stomach. Across the ballroom, a woman lowered her wine glass. Someone near the stage whispered, "Oh my God," and Gregory still couldn't look directly at his wife while he publicly destroyed her life. That was the part Sharon remembered years later. Not the cameras, not the headlines, not even the words themselves. It was the fact that Gregory looked terrified while he was doing it, like he already knew this moment was going to ruin both of them in completely different ways. Welcome to Mr. Kingswell Stories, where powerful life lessons come through unforgettable stories about love, betrayal, family, and second chances. If you're new here, subscribe and join us for more stories that make you think differently about life. And before we begin, tell me in the comments what time it is and where you're watching from. Sharon learned early that panic did not pay bills. That was not something anybody sat her down and taught her. It was something she picked up watching her mother at the kitchen table in their small house in Prince George's County, with a calculator, a yellow legal pad, and a stack of envelopes she never opened in front of company. Her mother, Denise, had a way of smoothing her palm over a bill before reading it, like she was trying to calm the paper down before it could upset her. Sharon noticed things like that. She noticed how Denise smiled harder on Sundays when money was tight, how she made one rotisserie chicken stretch from dinner into soup, then from soup into lunch containers, how she never said, "We're broke," but sometimes stood in front of the refrigerator longer than necessary, pretending to decide what to cook. Her father, Leonard, was different. Quiet, gentle, always smelling faintly of machine oil and peppermint gum. He had been an engineer, the kind of man who could fix a dishwasher, explain a bridge, and sketch an idea on the back of a church bulletin without making it sound impressive. Sharon used to sit on the floor of his garage while he worked, handing him tools she barely knew the names of. "Everything has a reason," he would say, turning some small metal part between his fingers. "You just have to look long enough to respect it." Sharon did not understand then how much of her life would become looking too long at things other people wanted to ignore. When Leonard died, the house changed without moving. His workbench stayed in the garage. His old notebooks sat in plastic bins. Denise did not throw anything away, but she also did not touch much. Grief became another unpaid bill in that house, something handled privately because breakfast still had to be made and laundry still had to be folded. Sharon was 17 when she first realized adults could be broken and still expect children to act normal. After the funeral, people brought casseroles, paper plates, grocery cards, and soft church hugs that smelled like lotion and perfume. Women from Denise's church whispered in corners and pressed folded cash into her hand. Sharon hated how grateful she felt. She hated that kindness could make you feel exposed. So she became useful. She answered the phone when Denise could not. She organized sympathy cards. She remembered which neighbor brought which dish. She learned how to drive before she was ready, because errands did not care if her hands shook. By the time she finished high school, Sharon had already developed the habit that would follow her into adulthood. If something hurt too much, she made a list. Years later, that habit became a career. Event strategy sounded glamorous when people said it at networking lunches in D.C. or Bethesda hotel lobbies. In reality, Sharon's job was managing other people's emergencies while dressed nicely enough that nobody guessed she had safety pins, stain remover, phone chargers, blister pads, and 3 backup seating charts in her bag. She was good at it because chaos did not scare her. A vendor could cancel. A donor could get offended. A storm could roll in right before an outdoor fundraiser. A CEO could forget half his speech. Sharon would inhale once, press her thumb against the side of her phone, and start fixing things before anyone else finished complaining. People called her calm. That was not exactly true. Calm was a feeling. Sharon had discipline. There was a difference. She lived in a modest townhouse and checked due dates before checking messages. Rent, student loans, car insurance, her mother's prescriptions when Denise pretended she had them covered. Sharon made decent money, but decent money in Maryland had a way of disappearing once life touched it. She kept spreadsheets nobody saw, and a small emergency fund she treated like oxygen. Depending on people made her nervous. Love, to Sharon, had always looked like showing up with groceries, watching somebody's child without being asked twice, or slipping $20 into a Bible cover because pride was real but hunger was real too. She trusted action more than language. Words were nice, but words did not keep the lights on. That was why she rarely talked about the pregnancy she lost in her late 20s. Not because it had not mattered, because it had mattered so much that saying it out loud felt like putting her grief in a room where people might mishandle it. She had been early enough that some people would have expected her to recover quickly, but far enough along emotionally that her body felt empty in a way she did not know how to explain. She went back to work too soon. She answered emails from bed. She told Denise, "I'm okay," with the kind of voice that ended conversations. Denise did not believe her, but she let the lie sit there. That was how women in their families sometimes loved each other, by knowing when not to force the wound open. By the time Sharon reached her early 30s, people saw a capable woman with clean makeup, strong posture, and a reputation for saving impossible nights. They did not see the girl who learned to measure security in full gas tanks and paid bills. They did not see the daughter still keeping her father's notebooks in storage because throwing them away felt like losing him twice. And they definitely did not see how tired she was of being strong. That part, Sharon kept hidden. She had learned long ago that if nobody saw you shaking, they assumed you were steady, and for most of her life, that assumption had been useful. Gregory learned very young that emotions were things people displayed carefully, if at all. In his family's house in Potomac, silence carried more authority than shouting ever could. The home itself was enormous. Limestone exterior, dark iron gates, polished floors that always felt cold under bare feet. But almost nothing inside it invited people to relax. Even the furniture looked expensive in a way that discouraged comfort. Dinner happened at exactly 7:30. His father believed lateness reflected weak character. Nobody said that directly, of course. Men like Richard Whitmore rarely said things directly when implication worked just as well. He would glance at the clock, fold his napkin once across his lap, and let disappointment spread quietly around the table until everyone adjusted themselves around it. Gregory's mother, Evelyn, handled tension differently. She smiled through it, smoothed things over, refilled wine glasses before conversations became confrontations. She treated discomfort the way some people treated dust, something constantly cleaned before guests could notice. As a child, Gregory mistook that for elegance. As an adult, he realized it was survival. "Your father doesn't like emotional scenes," Evelyn told him once after Gregory cried in front of relatives during a Christmas dinner when he was 9. She had knelt in his bedroom afterward, still wearing pearl earrings, her voice soft but tired. "It embarrasses him." Gregory remembered wiping his face quickly after that, not because he stopped feeling things, because he understood feelings could cost you standing in a room. By high school, he had become excellent at self-control. Teachers loved him. Coaches trusted him. Girlfriends called him thoughtful because he listened carefully and rarely raised his voice. What they mistook for maturity was often restraint. Gregory had learned how to contain reactions before he ever learned how to process them. At Georgetown, He studied business and finance with the kind of focus people admired in young men from wealthy families. His father called it discipline. Gregory knew it was fear. Fear of becoming dependent. Fear of public failure. Fear of disappointing people who treated love like performance reviews. The Whitmore family operated in quiet circles of Maryland wealth, where reputation mattered almost as much as money. Country clubs, foundation dinners, political fundraisers where everybody smiled while privately ranking one another's usefulness. Gregory understood those rooms instinctively because he had been raised inside them, but he never fully relaxed in them either. Even success felt conditional, especially with Richard. Nothing Gregory accomplished ever seemed complete enough to soften his father completely. When Gregory closed his first major acquisition in his early 30s, Richard simply nodded over dinner and asked, "And the debt exposure? No congratulations, no pride, just evaluation." Gregory told himself it no longer bothered him. That was mostly a lie. Work became the one place where effort produced measurable outcomes. Numbers behaved logically. Companies either stabilized or collapsed. Problems had systems. Risks had strategy. Gregory built his luxury hospitality and lifestyle group with the obsessive precision of someone trying to outrun emotional uncertainty through competence. And it worked, at least publicly. By 38, Gregory had become the kind of man magazines liked photographing beside glass buildings and carefully written headlines about leadership. Expensive suits, controlled smile, visionary entrepreneur. People admired how calm he looked under pressure. They did not see how little of himself he trusted outside performance. Relationships suffered from that in ways Gregory rarely understood in real time. Women often accused him of being emotionally unavailable, though none of them used those exact words at first. Instead, they said things like, "You disappear when things get hard," or, "Why does everything sound rehearsed with you?" Gregory genuinely hated hurting people. That was the confusing part. He was not careless in the obvious ways. He remembered birthdays, sent flowers after difficult family news, paid attention to details other men ignored, but vulnerability unsettled him. Whenever someone needed emotional messiness instead of solutions, Gregory instinctively moved toward fixing, managing, or controlling the situation. He thought protection and love were basically the same thing. That misunderstanding followed him everywhere. After Evelyn died from a sudden illness during Gregory's mid-30s, something inside him hardened further. The funeral itself felt like one long exercise in controlled grief. Men shook his hand firmly. Women touched his arm and spoke in softened voices. Richard never cried publicly. Not once. The morning after the burial, Gregory found his father already dressed for work in the kitchen. "You still going in?" Gregory asked quietly. Richard stirred cream into his coffee without looking up. What would staying home change? That answer stayed with Gregory for years. Not because he admired it, because some part of him feared he understood it. So Gregory kept moving. Long hours, expanding properties, investor meetings, endless travel between Bethesda, D.C., New York, and Miami. His assistants handled details of his life so efficiently that weeks sometimes passed where nobody asked him a personal question that mattered. And underneath all of it sat a loneliness Gregory never fully named because naming loneliness made it real. Sometimes late at night, after corporate dinners and polished networking events, he would walk alone through one of his luxury hotel properties after guests had gone upstairs. Empty lobby, soft jazz through hidden speakers, fresh flowers replaced before morning. Everything looked beautiful. Everything felt temporary. Gregory had spent most of his life learning how to build impressive environments for other people. He just had no idea yet how unprepared he was for intimacy with someone who could actually see through him. The first real conversation Sharon and Gregory ever had happened in a service hallway that smelled like melted ice, coffee grounds, and floral foam 3 days before the relaunch of one of Gregory's luxury Bethesda properties. Almost everything that could go wrong already had. Imported arrangements were delayed at customs. Half the lighting team was threatening to walk because invoices had not cleared. A celebrity chef attached to the event suddenly demanded menu changes after the tasting had already been approved. Gregory's executives kept holding meetings about the crisis instead of solving it. Sharon arrived carrying 2 phones, a rolling garment bag, and a level of irritation she no longer bothered hiding professionally. She found Gregory standing near the loading dock in shirt sleeves, listening to three men argue about centerpiece colors, while hotel staff waited nearby for actual instructions. "Do you want beautiful?" Sharon asked evenly, setting her bag down against the wall, "or do you want finished by 6? The hallway went quiet. One executive looked offended immediately. Gregory looked tired, not angry, not defensive, just deeply tired in a way Sharon recognized from overworked people pretending adrenaline could replace sleep. "What's your solution?" he asked. She answered without hesitation. "Cut the custom installs in Ballroom B. Use the local inventory downstairs. Simplify the stage entrances. Reassign the overnight crew before you lose them completely. And somebody needs to stop holding meetings while the staff is drowning." One of the executives exhaled sharply through his nose. Gregory ignored him. Then he said something Sharon didn't expect. "Okay." No argument, no power struggle. Just okay. That earned a small amount of her respect immediately. Over the next 72 hours, they barely stopped moving. Sharon coordinated vendors, rewrote schedules, fixed staffing disasters, and somehow still found time to kneel on ballroom carpet in heels while taping extension cords under tables because the setup crew was behind. Gregory kept appearing beside her unexpectedly, not hovering, helping. He carried boxes when staff disappeared, learned in names quickly, ordered food for exhausted crews before somebody had to ask. At one point, Sharon caught him helping a young banquet server clean broken glass after another executive blamed her publicly for an accident that clearly wasn't her fault. That surprised Sharon more than his money ever could. Most wealthy men she encountered professionally performed kindness upward, not downward. Around 2 a.m. before the launch, the air conditioning system failed during final setup. The ballroom turned humid almost immediately. One of the florists started crying quietly near the stage. An executive muttered something about catastrophe. Sharon rubbed the side of her forehead and walked into the service corridor to think. A minute later, Gregory followed her carrying 2 bottles of water from a vending machine. "For the record," he said, handing her one, "I hate all of these people right now." It caught her off guard enough that she laughed, not politely, genuinely. That moment shifted something. Not romance yet, recognition. They stood there, an uncomfortable heat revising the event timeline on a yellow legal pad balanced against a laundry cart, while kitchen staff rushed behind them carrying trays. Gregory noticed Sharon never panicked publicly. Sharon noticed Gregory became softer away from audiences. The launch ended up succeeding in the way high-end events often do. Guests admired elegance without understanding how close everything came to collapsing hours earlier. Afterward, Gregory thanked her personally instead of sending an assistant. That also mattered. Then, life kept putting them near each other. A Baltimore fundraiser 6 months later, an investor dinner in D.C., a hospitality conference near National Harbor, where Sharon quietly rescued a panel Gregory was moderating after the keynote speaker failed to arrive on time. They started texting occasionally, mostly work at first, then complaints, then observations. Gregory sent dry comments about board members who spoke in circles. Sharon sent photos of disasters she was currently managing with captions like, "If I survive this wedding, I deserve partial ownership of the venue." What surprised Sharon most was how carefully Gregory listened, not performatively, actually listened. One rainy Sunday afternoon, Gregory came to Denise's house for dinner in Prince George's County, carrying flowers that were too expensive and a bottle of wine nobody opened because Denise didn't drink on Sundays. Gregory looked almost nervous standing in that kitchen. Voices overlapped constantly. Sharon's cousin Renee argued with the television during a football game. Denise moved between stove burners while asking everybody questions at once. Somebody's child ran through the hallway, holding juice boxes. Gregory stood there for a second, like a man realizing families could sound loud without being angry. Denise handed him a dish towel halfway through dinner, without ceremony. "You dry," she said. And to Sharon's surprise, he did, no hesitation. Later that night, driving back toward Bethesda, Gregory rested one hand against the steering wheel and said quietly, "Your family actually talks to each other." Sharon looked out the passenger window. Most people's families do. He didn't answer immediately. That silence told her more about him than words could have. A few weeks later, Gregory invited Sharon to dinner with his father at the Whitmore home in Potomac. The house was beautiful. The evening was exhausting. Richard Whitmore asked Sharon polite questions in the same tone men use during interviews. Gregory's stepmother smiled constantly without warmth, ever fully reaching her eyes. Nobody interrupted each other. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody relaxed either. On the drive home, Sharon sat quietly for almost 10 minutes before speaking. "They don't fight fair," she finally said. Gregory glanced at her briefly. "I know." That honesty settled somewhere deep inside her. Because for the first time, Sharon realized Gregory was not pretending his family hadn't damaged him. He just didn't fully understand yet how much the first year of Sharon and Gregory's marriage felt less like a honeymoon and more like two people slowly learning each other's damage. Not incompatibility, damage. They moved into a sprawling modern house just outside Bethesda with floor-to-ceiling windows, heated bathroom floors, and a kitchen so large Denise joked it looked like nobody actually cooks in there. But Sharon cooked anyway. Not every night, but enough to make the place feel lived in instead of staged. Some evenings, Gregory came home after 9 carrying exhaustion like another tailored accessory. He would loosen his tie near the doorway while Sharon stood barefoot at the stove finishing pasta or reheating something because meetings had pushed dinner too late again. "How bad?" she'd ask. Gregory usually answered the same way, manageable. That word started irritating her after a while. Everything with him was manageable. Investor panic, staffing cuts, lawsuits, family tension, stress, grief. It was like he believed naming something honestly gave it power. Sharon understood privacy, but sometimes his restraint made her feel emotionally locked outside her own marriage. One rainy Thursday, about 8 months after the wedding, Sharon found Gregory sitting in the dark at the kitchen island, with his laptop open and untouched whiskey near his elbow. "You gonna answer emails?" she asked softly, hanging her coat over a chair, "or just threaten them with your presence?" Gregory gave a tired half smile, undecided. She walked behind him, rested her chin briefly against the top of his head, and felt how tense his shoulders were beneath his dress shirt. "You ate?" "Eventually. That means no. I had something at the office." Sharon opened the fridge anyway. That became part of their rhythm. Gregory, forgetting his body, had limits. Sharon quietly compensating for them. At first it felt intimate. Later it started feeling lonely. Because emotional labor had a way of becoming invisible once people depended on it long enough. Gregory rarely asked for help directly, but he leaned on Sharon constantly in subtler ways. She remembered his schedule better than he did, knew when he was overwhelmed before he admitted it, smoothed tension after difficult dinners with investors or family, handled the emotional temperature of rooms he entered too distracted to read properly. And Sharon did it willingly, mostly. But willingness and exhaustion can live in the same body for a long time before either one says anything out loud. The pregnancy changed the balance between them almost immediately. After the miscarriage years earlier, Sharon did not allow herself uncomplicated excitement. Even hearing the baby's heartbeat the first time made fear arrive alongside joy so quickly it embarrassed her. Gregory reacted differently, protectively, aggressively protectively. He researched specialists before Sharon even finished her first trimester, changed doctors twice because he disliked bedside communication styles, installed security systems Sharon never asked for, sent assistants to handle errands she preferred doing herself. At first, she understood the intention behind it. Then it started making her feel managed instead of loved. One Saturday morning in late spring, Sharon stood in their laundry room sorting baby clothes while Gregory paced nearby on a work call. "Yes, I saw the numbers," he said sharply into his headset. "Then fix it before Monday." The baby kicked suddenly beneath Sharon's oversized t-shirt. She pressed her hand lightly against her stomach and waited for Gregory to notice. He didn't. Still pacing, still talking, still somewhere mentally unreachable. Later that afternoon, they drove to Potomac for dinner with Richard Whitmore. Gregory gripped the steering wheel too tightly the entire ride. "You don't have to go into board mode before we even get there," Sharon muttered, staring out the passenger window. "I'm not in board mode." "You absolutely are." Gregory exhaled quietly. "My father's asking questions because he's concerned." "No," Sharon said. "He asks questions because he likes watching people defend themselves." Gregory didn't respond immediately. That silence told her she wasn't wrong. Dinner itself felt like surviving a performance review. Richard discussed market conditions while barely acknowledging Sharon's pregnancy beyond one restrained congratulations. Gregory became more formal around him, without seeming to notice it happening. Straighter posture, shorter answers, controlled voice. On the drive home, Sharon leaned her forehead against the cool passenger window. "You disappear around him," she said quietly. Gregory kept his eyes on the road. "That's not fair." "It's true. He's difficult. And you become somebody else." Gregory's jaw tightened. "What exactly do you want me to do, Sharon?" She turned toward him slowly. "I want you to stop acting like everything is your responsibility alone. That's easy for you to say." The second the words left his mouth, Gregory regretted them. Sharon looked away immediately. Not dramatic, not angry, just hurt in that quiet way that made Gregory feel worse. Because he knew exactly what she had carried her entire life. Bills, family pressure, fear, responsibility, and now pregnancy exhaustion on top of all of it. By the 7th month, Sharon's feet swelled daily after events. She kept flats in her car and protein bars in her purse because nausea still hit unexpectedly. Some nights she woke around 3 in the morning needing water, unable to breathe comfortably, while Gregory slept beside her with one arm across his eyes like even unconsciousness exhausted him. They were still loving each other during that season. That was the tragedy of it. But love had started competing with stress, silence, ego, fear, and two completely different understandings of what protection meant. Sharon believed love required honesty, even ugly honesty. Gregory believed love meant shielding people from danger until you had solutions. Neither of them understood yet how destructive those differences were becoming, only that something inside the marriage had begun tightening quietly beneath the surface, like pressure building inside walls nobody else could see. The first time Sharon seriously thought Gregory might be hiding something from her, he left the room to answer a phone call at 2:13 in the morning. Not unusual by itself. Gregory's companies operated across multiple time zones. Late calls happened. Emergency emails happened. Entire weekends disappeared into situations Sharon was never fully allowed to understand. But this felt different. Because he took both phones, Sharon noticed small things for a living. Toned changes, delays, body language. The emotional temperature of a room before other people even realized it shifted. It was part of why she excelled professionally. And lately, Gregory had started moving around their marriage like a man trying not to leave fingerprints. She lay still in bed, listening to his muffled voice downstairs. Not angry, careful. That was worse. The next morning, he acted normal enough that Sharon almost convinced herself she imagined the tension. Gregory stood in the kitchen in gray slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms while coffee brewed beside him. "You're staring at me," he said mildly, without looking up from his phone. "You left the room last night. I didn't want to wake you." "You already did." Gregory finally glanced up. Something flickered across his face too quickly to fully read. Then it disappeared. It was work. That answer sat between them like a closed door. Sharon opened the fridge harder than necessary. "Everything's always work lately." Gregory rubbed tired fingers against the bridge of his nose. "We're restructuring 3 divisions at once, Sharon. You say that like I'm asking for quarterly reports. That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" He looked at her for a second too long before answering. "Nothing." That word irritated her. Instantly. Nothing. Another polished non-answer. Sharon shut the refrigerator quietly this time, because anger exhausted her more during pregnancy. Everything did lately. Her back hurt constantly. Sleep came in fragments. Some afternoons, she became emotional so quickly it embarrassed her. And underneath all of it sat a fear she rarely admitted out loud. The last pregnancy had ended after she started noticing things were wrong physically, before doctors confirmed it. Every unfamiliar ache now made anxiety bloom immediately in her chest. Gregory knew that, which made his emotional distance feel crueler than he probably intended. Over the following weeks, the secrecy multiplied in ways difficult to prove, but impossible to ignore. Gregory started stepping outside during dinners to answer calls. He became protective of documents he previously left open around her without concern. Twice, Sharon woke around midnight and realized his side of the bed was empty, only to find him downstairs speaking quietly in his office with the door partially closed. One evening she came home from a client meeting in Baltimore earlier than expected. and found Gregory standing in the driveway beside a woman she didn't recognize. Tall, blonde, expensively dressed in the kind of effortless way money teaches people. The woman got into a black SUV almost immediately after seeing Sharon's car pull in. Gregory walked toward Sharon before she even fully stepped out of the vehicle. "That looked weird," he said first. Not, "Hello," not, "How was your day?" That looked weird. Sharon closed the car door slowly. Who was she? Consulting contractor. For what? Gregory hesitated, just briefly, but Sharon caught it. Crisis management. What crisis? It's complicated. That's becoming your favorite phrase. Gregory lowered his voice immediately when he heard tension enter hers. Can we not do this outside? The problem was, Sharon suddenly felt like outside might be the only place anything honest still existed between them. Later that night, she stood barefoot in their bathroom removing makeup, while Gregory sat on the edge of the bed, answering emails, or pretending to. "You know what's starting to embarrass me?" Sharon asked quietly. Gregory looked up. "What?" "The fact that I can tell something's wrong before I even enter a room now." He stared at her carefully. "Nothing's wrong. See?" Sharon laughed once under her breath, but there was no humor in it. "That right there." "What right there?" "You keep talking to me like I'm somebody you manage instead of somebody you married." Gregory stood slowly. "That's not fair." "Then tell me what's happening." "I can't fully explain it right now." "Why?" "Because there are legal issues involved." Sharon turned toward him fully then. The baby shifted heavily inside her stomach. "What legal issues?" Gregory's silence lasted too long. Not accidental silence, measured silence. And suddenly Sharon felt something she had not wanted to feel in her marriage. Humiliation, not because she knew there was another woman, not because she had proof of betrayal, because her husband clearly knew something about their life that she did not. That imbalance started poisoning everything. She stopped sleeping properly, started checking his expressions unconsciously whenever his phone vibrated, started noticing how often he looked distracted, even while sitting directly beside her. A week later, Sharon found Gregory alone in his office after midnight, staring at documents spread across his desk. He looked exhausted, older somehow. The room smelled faintly like coffee and stress. Sharon stayed in the doorway with one hand resting beneath her stomach. "Gregory." He looked up immediately, and for one brief second, she saw fear cross his face before he hid it. Real fear, not work stress, something heavier. Sharon swallowed slowly, then asked the question that had been growing quietly between them for weeks. "Are you in trouble?" she said carefully. "Or are we in trouble?" Gregory held her gaze for a long moment. Then he answered in the same calm voice he used whenever he thought control alone could save something. "I'm handling it." By the morning of the gala, Sharon felt like her body had stopped belonging entirely to her. Her fingers were swollen before noon. The skin beneath her breasts ached from carrying extra weight. Every time the baby shifted, pressure rolled through her lower back hard enough to make her pause mid-sentence. Her doctor had already warned her twice about stress. "Your body doesn't care whether the pressure is emotional or physical," Dr. Ellis told her during the last appointment. "Stress still lands somewhere." Sharon promised she would slow down after the event. That became her answer for everything lately. After this launch, after this quarter, after Gregory got through whatever he wasn't telling her. The gala occupied one of the luxury properties near the Bethesda-Potomac corridor Gregory had spent years transforming into the crown jewel of his company. Everything about the evening looked aggressively expensive. White orchids climbed mirrored installations near the ballroom entrance. Waiters moved through the crowd balancing champagne trays like choreography. Investors, local media figures, politicians, and executives filled the room wearing the kind of wealth that looked understated only because it cost so much. Sharon had personally saved the event 3 separate times in the previous 48 hours. One vendor cancellation, one seating disaster, one near breakdown involving the audio team, and a sponsor's assistant who kept changing speech timing without informing production. She handled all of it while 7 months pregnant and running mostly on caffeine, protein bars, and stubbornness. By 6:30 that evening, her feet hurt badly enough she had already switched into backup flats behind the stage. "You need to sit down," Renee whispered, when she caught Sharon pressing a hand against her lower spine near the lighting booth. "I'm fine." "You always say that right before something stupid happens." Sharon smiled faintly, despite herself. Renee adjusted the strap sliding down Sharon's shoulder and lowered her voice. "You talked to Gregory today?" "Barely." That answer sat heavily between them. Across the ballroom, Gregory stood near a cluster of investors wearing a dark tailored tuxedo and the same controlled expression Sharon had grown increasingly angry at over the past few months. From a distance, he looked composed. Up close, she knew better. His shoulders were too tight. His jaw kept flexing, and twice already that evening, Sharon caught him checking the exits like a man mentally preparing for impact. When their eyes finally met across the room, Gregory walked toward her immediately. "You okay?" he asked softly. The question irritated her more than concern probably should have. "You mean physically or emotionally?" Gregory exhaled once through his nose. "Sharon, no, seriously. Which one are we pretending to discuss tonight?" A waiter passed between them, carrying drinks. Gregory lowered his voice further. "Can we not do this here?" "Then where?" Sharon asked quietly, "because apparently our house isn't working either." For a second, Gregory looked like he might actually say something honest. Then, his phone buzzed. Everything inside him closed again, almost instantly. He checked the screen. "I have to handle this." "Of course you do," Sharon almost said. Instead, she stepped back. "Go." Gregory hesitated before walking away. And somehow that hesitation hurt worse than if he'd left quickly. By the time the ballroom lights dimmed for Gregory's speech, Sharon felt emotionally numb in the dangerous way exhaustion sometimes creates. She sat near the front beside board members and donors, while cameras repositioned themselves toward the stage. The baby shifted sharply beneath her ribs. Sharon adjusted carefully in her chair and reached automatically for the glass of water near her plate. On stage, Gregory accepted the introduction applause with a tight smile that never fully reached his eyes. Then he looked toward the teleprompter and froze. It happened fast, small enough. Most people in the ballroom never noticed, but Sharon noticed immediately. Gregory's expression changed for half a second. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something colder, fear, real fear. The room continued clapping lightly, while Gregory stared ahead at words Sharon could not yet see. He could have stopped everything right there. Sharon would think about that for years afterward. He could have stepped away from the podium, asked for a pause, blamed technical issues, done literally anything except continue. Instead, Gregory touched his cufflinks once beneath the stage lights, then leaned toward the microphone. "My marriage," he began carefully, "has become a loveless empire I can no longer remain inside." The ballroom went unnaturally still. At first, Sharon genuinely thought she misunderstood him. Her brain rejected the sentence before her emotions caught up. Gregory still wasn't looking directly at her. "I'll be relocating overseas," he continued, voice controlled but thinner now, "with someone who has helped me understand what honesty actually requires." Somebody near the back gasped quietly. A phone camera lifted immediately. Another followed. Sharon felt all the blood leave her face at once. The baby tightened painfully inside her stomach. Around her, the room transformed into the specific kind of silence wealthy people create when they desperately want spectacle, but need to appear civilized while witnessing it. Gregory finally looked at her then, and somehow he looked almost sick. That was the part that shattered her composure completely. Not cruelty, not arrogance, terror. As though he already understood, he had detonated something neither of them would survive cleanly. Sharon gripped the edge of her chair so hard her knuckles hurt. Pressure rolled violently through her abdomen. Sharp, wrong. Her breathing changed immediately. Somewhere nearby, somebody whispered, "She's pregnant." But phones were already recording, and Sharon realized with horrifying clarity that the worst moment of her life no longer belonged only to her. The first video hit the internet before Sharon even made it back home from the gala. By morning, there were already edits. Slow zooms on her face. Dramatic music layered under Gregory's speech. Freeze frames of Sharon gripping the chair while visibly pregnant. Comment sections full of strangers speaking with the confidence of people who believed humiliation made someone public property. Sharon learned that viral shame moved faster than grief. At first, she avoided looking. Then, she started looking constantly. Around 4 a.m, 2 days after the gala, Sharon sat alone in the dark living room with her phone brightness turned low, While Gregory slept upstairs in the guest room, neither of them had officially agreed would become permanent. The house felt emotionally poisoned now. Too large, too quiet. She scrolled anyway. Girl ignored all the red flags for the money. He looked miserable standing beside her. That baby trapped him. Black women always want to be chosen by rich white men so bad. Sharon stopped reading, then started again 30 seconds later. Her chest hurt in a way that felt half emotional, half physical. The internet had flattened the worst moment of her life into content people consumed between lunch breaks and gym selfies. And what unsettled her most was how many people sounded entertained. Gregory's public statement had already triggered financial blogs, local gossip sites, and legal speculation threads across Maryland business circles. Somebody found the initial separation filings through public case search records within 48 hours. TikTok creators started analyzing Sharon's body language like forensic evidence. One woman with 500,000 followers called Sharon the human version of marrying for aesthetics. Sharon watched that clip twice before throwing her phone onto the couch hard enough to scare herself. The baby shifted painfully beneath her ribs. Immediately, guilt flooded her body. "Okay," she whispered shakily, pressing both hands against her stomach. "Okay, I'm sorry." She had started apologizing to the baby for things that were not his fault. That terrified her quietly. The next few days blurred together strangely. Gregory barely stayed home. Lawyers called constantly. Publicists emailed statements Sharon refused to approve because they sounded bloodless and fake. One afternoon she walked into the kitchen and found Gregory standing near the island, speaking in low tones with a man from his legal team. Both of them stopped talking immediately when they saw her. That silence humiliated her more than shouting would have. Sharon opened the refrigerator slowly, while neither man moved. "Don't stop on my account," she said without turning around. "Sharon," Gregory started carefully. "We were discussing—" "I know what discussing looks like." The lawyer gathered his folder almost instantly. "I can come back later. Please," Sharon replied. After he left, the kitchen stayed painfully quiet. Gregory looked exhausted, his tie loosened, dark circles beneath his eyes. But Sharon could no longer access sympathy cleanly, because every emotion now dragged another one behind it. "You embarrassed me in front of the entire country," she said flatly. Gregory swallowed hard. That wasn't supposed to happen like that. Sharon laughed once, not because it was funny. "Do you hear yourself? I'm trying to fix it." "There shouldn't be a fix it, Gregory." Her voice cracked slightly on his name. That made both of them freeze. Sharon looked down immediately, ashamed of the emotion slipping out. "I was standing there carrying your child," she whispered. "Do you understand how exposed I felt?" Gregory stepped toward her instinctively. She stepped back just as quickly. The distance landed visibly on his face. But Sharon no longer knew how to separate safety from humiliation around him. Later that night, Renee came over carrying groceries Sharon never asked for. "You eating actual food?" Renee asked, while unpacking containers onto the counter. "Yes." That wasn't convincing. Sharon sat at the kitchen table wearing one of Gregory's old sweatshirts because none of her comfortable clothes fit properly anymore. Renee glanced toward the staircase. Here, technically. That bad? Sharon stared at her untouched tea. "I don't even know what's real right now." Renee didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened the fridge, frowned at the lack of groceries, and started rearranging shelves with the irritated energy of someone who loved through practical tasks. After a minute, she asked quietly, "You want to know the truth?" Sharon looked up. "People online don't actually care what happened." "What do you mean?" "They care that it's dramatic enough to distract them from their own lives for 10 minutes. That should have comforted Sharon. Instead, it made her feel strangely invisible, because the internet would move on eventually. But she still had to wake up inside this body tomorrow, still had to carry this pregnancy, still had to walk through grocery stores while strangers recognized her face. That became the part she underestimated most. Not headlines, recognition. 3 days later, a woman at a pharmacy near Rockville stared too long at Sharon's stomach before whispering something to her friend. Both women looked away quickly when Sharon noticed, but not quickly enough. Back in the parking lot, Sharon sat inside her car, gripping the steering wheel while nausea rolled through her violently. Not morning sickness, anxiety. Her pulse throbbed in her throat. For the first time since the gala, Sharon finally admitted something to herself she had been resisting for days. Her life no longer felt private enough to survive inside comfortably, and underneath that realization sat another fear, growing steadily louder. She didn't know if her marriage was dying, but she knew she was starting to disappear inside the humiliation of it. Sharon left Bethesda on a gray Tuesday morning, while Gregory was in New York, for meetings neither of them pretended mattered more than their marriage anymore. She packed quietly, not dramatically, not angrily, which somehow made it sadder. 2 suitcases, pregnancy clothes, important documents, prenatal vitamins, chargers, insurance paperwork. The baby monitor Denise insisted she take early because you don't wait till the last minute for things that matter. Sharon stood in the nursery halfway through packing and realized most of the furniture still smelled new. That nearly broke her. The crib hadn't even been used yet. By the time she loaded the car, her lower back ached hard enough that she had to pause beside the driveway and breathe through the pressure. The September air carried the first hint of cold underneath the humidity. Somewhere across the neighborhood, lawn equipment buzzed steadily. Normal life. That part felt offensive lately. Gregory called while she was crossing the Bay Bridge. Sharon stared at the dashboard screen for 3 rings before answering through Bluetooth. "Where are you?" he asked immediately. Not hello, not how are you feeling. She tightened both hands on the steering wheel. Driving. Driving where? Eastern Shore. Silence. Then, Sharon, I can't stay there right now. You left without telling me. You announced the end of our marriage into a microphone. Gregory exhaled hard through his nose. That's not fair. Her laugh came out tired. You keep saying that. Traffic slowed slightly ahead of her, near the bridge toll lanes. Sharon shifted carefully in her seat, trying to relieve pressure in her hips. I need quiet, she said finally. Then let me come there. No. The answer arrived too fast for either of them to pretend it didn't hurt. Gregory went silent again. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded smaller somehow. You shouldn't be alone right now. Sharon stared straight ahead at the water stretching wide and gray beneath the bridge. I already am. She hung up before he could answer. The rental house belonged to a woman from Denise's church network, who spent most of the year living with her daughter in Delaware. Small 1-story place outside Chestertown. Faded blue shutters. Gravel driveway. Water visible through bare trees behind the property, if you stood at the right angle near the porch. It smelled faintly like cedar and old books inside. Sharon stood alone in the kitchen after arriving, listening to the refrigerator hum in the silence. No staff. No cameras. No Gregory pacing through calls at midnight. Just quiet. For the first hour, the quiet felt peaceful. By nighttime, it started feeling frightening. Loneliness changed shape during pregnancy. It stopped feeling abstract and became logistical. Who helps if something happens at 2 a.m? Who drives if contractions start suddenly? Who notices if you stop answering texts? Sharon sat at the tiny kitchen table that first night, eating microwaved soup while opening her banking apps for the 3rd time that day. That part humiliated her privately. People online thought she had endless money because Gregory was wealthy. But wealth tied up in trusts, structures, corporate holdings, and legal disputes didn't automatically translate into immediate access. Sharon had her own savings and income, but pregnancy had slowed work significantly even before the scandal. Now contracts were quietly disappearing too. Nobody wanted messy publicity attached to luxury events. Sharon stared at the numbers until anxiety tightened across her chest again. Then her phone buzzed. Denise, you eat? Her mother asked immediately after Sharon answered, yes. What'd you have? Mama. That wasn't an answer. Despite everything, Sharon smiled faintly into the empty kitchen. Soup. Store-bought? Yes. Lord help me. Sharon leaned back carefully in the chair. Outside, wind rattled lightly through trees near the water. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Denise asked quietly, you okay? Sharon opened her mouth automatically to lie. Nothing came out. That scared her more than crying would have. Her mother heard the silence immediately. I'm coming Friday, Denise said gently. You don't have to. I wasn't asking. After the call, Sharon carried a load of laundry slowly down the narrow hallway because stopping normal routines entirely felt dangerous somehow. The baby shifted heavily while she bent near the dryer. Then, suddenly her stomach tightened. Hard, Sharp pressure wrapped across her abdomen and lower back at the same time. Sharon froze. The sensation eased after a few seconds. Braxton Hicks, she told herself immediately. Stress. Normal. Still, her hands shook slightly afterward while folding towels. Over the next week, the loneliness settled into her body. Like weather, church women dropped off casseroles she barely touched. Renee called nightly. Gregory texted constantly, though Sharon rarely answered beyond short practical responses. You make it to the doctor, okay? Did you eat today? Please answer me. Sometimes she typed angry responses, then deleted them. One evening near sunset, Sharon walked slowly along the edge of the property, wrapped in one of Gregory's old hoodies against the wind. The Chesapeake air smelled damp and cold. Birds moved low over the water, while boats rocked quietly in the distance. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, Sharon suddenly realized she was terrified. Not of Gregory, not even of being left. Of becoming somebody raising a child while emotionally exhausted and pretending she wasn't. That fear followed her back into the house. Later that night, while brushing her teeth before bed, Sharon felt another painful tightening low in her stomach. Then another, closer together this time. She gripped the bathroom counter slowly as cold fear spread through her chest. And when she looked down a few seconds later and saw the faint spotting beginning, her entire body went still. The first thing Sharon remembered clearly afterward was the hospital ceiling moving above her. White lights, blurred motion, voices layered over each other, blood pressures climbing. How far apart are the contractions now? Sharon, stay with me. Everything after that, fractured into disconnected pieces, her brain never fully stitched back together properly. The drive from Chestertown, Denise gripping the steering wheel too tightly while pretending not to panic. Sharon curled sideways in the passenger seat, breathing through pain that no longer felt temporary or manageable. At one point she remembered apologizing to the baby out loud, over and over. I'm trying, she whispered, through tears she hadn't realized were falling. I'm trying, baby, I'm trying. The labor came too early. Not catastrophic, but early enough that every doctor and nurse spoke in calm voices, carrying just enough caution to make Sharon's fear worse. Gregory arrived at the hospital sometime during the second night after driving back from New York. Sharon woke briefly to find him standing near the doorway in wrinkled clothes she had never seen him wear twice in public before. His face looked hollow. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Gregory stepped forward, slowly. How are you feeling? Sharon stared at him. The question felt impossible to answer honestly. Tired didn't cover it. Scared didn't cover it. Humiliated still sat inside her body like something physical. The contractions hit again before she could respond. Sharon folded forward immediately with a sharp sound escaping her throat. Gregory moved instinctively toward the bed. She grabbed the rail instead. Not him. That hesitation landed visibly across his face before he masked it. The baby boy arrived just after sunrise, weighing barely enough to calm anyone fully. Small, angry, breathing, thank God, but struggling enough that NICU staff moved quickly once he was born. Sharon only held him for less than a minute before they carried him away. That nearly destroyed her. No, wait. Her voice cracked badly. A nurse touched her shoulder gently. We just need to help him breathe a little easier, okay? Okay. People kept asking if things were okay. Nothing felt okay. The next few days blurred into monitors, hospital coffee, antiseptic air, and exhaustion so complete Sharon sometimes forgot what day it was. She shuffled slowly between her recovery room and the NICU, wearing oversized socks and disposable hospital underwear while trying not to fall apart publicly. Her son looked impossibly small inside the incubator, tiny chest rising unevenly, one hand no larger than Gregory's thumb. Sharon sat beside him for hours, listening to machine sounds while guilt crawled through her relentlessly. Too much stress, too much pressure, too much crying. Some irrational part of her became convinced she had failed him before he even fully arrived in the world. Gregory stayed nearby constantly during those days, but the distance between them remained painful and strange. He brought coffee Sharon barely drank, handled paperwork, spoke calmly with doctors, slept upright in uncomfortable chairs without complaining, but every kindness now existed beside betrayal. That complexity exhausted Sharon more than anger alone would have. One evening, after visiting hours quieted down, Sharon sat in the hospital bed pumping breast milk while staring blankly at the muted television mounted on the wall. A gossip segment flashed briefly across the screen. Her own face appeared, then Gregory's, then footage from the gala. Sharon reached for the remote, so fast tubing tangled painfully against her skin. Afterward, she sat there breathing too hard, while tears rolled silently down her face. Gregory walked in seconds later carrying takeout containers. He stopped immediately when he saw her. What happened? Sharon wiped at her face angrily. Nothing. That word again. Nothing. Gregory set the food down carefully. Sharon, please don't. Her voice sounded thin from exhaustion. I cannot survive this if I have to keep explaining how bad this hurts. Gregory stood motionless beside the chair. For the first time since she met him, Sharon saw a man who genuinely did not know how to repair the damage standing directly in front of him. And somehow that frightened her too, because she had spent years believing Gregory could fix anything. A week later, they finally brought the baby home. The rental house felt even smaller now, with bottles drying beside the sink and folded baby blankets covering half the couch. Sharon barely slept. Days lost shape completely. Morning became afternoon without warning. She cried unexpectedly over small things, dropped pacifiers, unfinished laundry, commercials involving fathers. Some nights, she stood over the bassinet checking repeatedly to make sure the baby was still breathing. Other nights, she stared at him feeling so overwhelmed by responsibility that panic crawled up her throat unexpectedly. Then guilt followed immediately afterward, because she loved him fiercely. But love did not erase exhaustion, or fear, or loneliness. One rainy afternoon, while the baby finally slept against her chest, Denise arrived carrying storage bins from Sharon's old townhouse. You still got half your daddy's garage packed away, Denise muttered, while setting them near the wall. Figure you should decide what stays and what goes. Later that night, unable to sleep again, Sharon opened one of the bins while rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside sat Leonard's old notebooks, careful sketches, engineering diagrams, handwritten notes in familiar block lettering. Beneath them rested several small metal tools wrapped neatly inside faded cloth. Sharon picked one up slowly. The handle still carried faint burn marks from her father's hands. For the first time in weeks, something inside her became quiet enough to hear herself think. Sharon did not decide to start a business, at least not at first. At first, she was just trying to get through one night without opening her phone and seeing strangers argue about whether she deserved what happened to her. The baby had finally fallen asleep in the bassinet beside the couch, one tiny fist resting against his cheek. Rain tapped softly against the rental house windows. A half-finished bottle sat in a bowl of warm water near the sink. Her own dinner, a piece of toast with peanut butter, had gone cold on a paper towel beside Leonard's old notebooks. Sharon sat at the kitchen table with one of his small metal tools in her hand. She turned it over slowly. The handle still had those faint burn marks, the kind she remembered from sitting on the garage floor as a child, watching Leonard bend clothes over some project he refused to call important. A thing should always be traceable to the hands that made it. She heard his voice so clearly that for a second it hurt. The first piece she made was ugly. Not charming ugly, actually ugly. A thin wire band bent slightly uneven, with a small hammered plate that refused to sit flat no matter how many times she adjusted it. She almost threw it away twice, but the baby woke up before she could, and by the time she finished feeding him, she no longer had the energy to be disappointed in herself. So she left it on the table. The next night, she tried again, then again. Within a week, the kitchen table stopped looking like a place where people ate meals and started looking like a small, exhausted workshop. Pliers beside burp cloths, sketches tucked beneath diaper coupons, a soldering torch placed carefully far from the baby bottles drying near the sink. Denise hated the torch immediately. You got fire sitting next to formula, she said one afternoon, standing in the doorway with grocery bags on both arms. It's not next to formula. It's in the same zip code as formula. Sharon almost smiled. Almost. Denise set the bags down and looked at the table more closely. You made all this. Trying to. For what? Sharon shrugged without looking up. I don't know yet. That answer was honest. The pieces became cleaner slowly. Simple vow bands, small pendants, thin bracelets stamped with dates, initials, quiet promises. Nothing flashy, Nothing that looked like the jewelry Gregory's world would have admired under museum lighting. These pieces looked personal, human, like something somebody wore because it remembered what they survived. Renee posted the first video without asking. Sharon was furious for about 6 minutes. The clip showed Sharon at the kitchen table in a faded Howard University sweatshirt, hair wrapped messily, baby monitor beside her elbow, carefully polishing a small silver band while rain blurred the window behind her. The caption read, "She's making promise pieces for people who still believe promises should mean something." By morning, it had been shared thousands of times. Sharon stared at the numbers, with the same suspicion she once reserved for suspicious invoices. "No," she muttered. Renee, on speakerphone, sounded too pleased with herself. "Yes, take it down." "Absolutely not." Renee, "Girl, people are asking where they can buy." "I don't have a store." "Then make one." "I have a premature baby, a legal nightmare, and my husband ruined my life on video." "Okay," Renee said, not missing a beat. "So we're calling the collection something honest." Sharon hated that she laughed, not loudly, but enough that the baby stirred in his bassinet. The first orders came from women who wrote too much in the message boxes. A widow in Ohio wanted a ring engraved with the date she finally stopped wearing her wedding band. A nurse in Atlanta wanted matching bracelets for herself and her daughter after leaving a marriage nobody at church believed was hurting her. A woman in Baltimore wrote only, "I need something that means I kept myself." Sharon read that one 3 times, then cried in the bathroom with the faucet running so Denise would not hear. The business grew in the least glamorous way possible. Shipping labels jammed in a cheap printer. Packaging bought in bulk with money Sharon was scared to spend. Customer service emails answered at 2 in the morning while the baby slept against her chest. Forms, sales tax, business registration, separate bank account, insurance. A local accountant Denise's church friend recommended because he may dress like somebody's uncle, but he knows paperwork. Nothing about it felt magical. It felt like work, but work Sharon could touch. Work that did not require waiting for Gregory to tell the truth. One night, after packing 23 orders while the baby fussed through gas pains, Sharon stood over the sink washing bottles and suddenly began crying so hard she had to sit on the kitchen floor. Not because she was hopeless, because she was tired of surviving everything. The baby cried from the living room. Sharon wiped her face with the back of her wrist, stood up slowly, and went to him. That was how the rebuilding happened. Not in one brave moment. In repetition, in invoices, in feeding schedules, in shaking hands, in making one more piece after promising herself she could stop. And somewhere between grief and exhaustion, Sharon began to understand that her hands still knew how to create something honest, even after her life had been turned into a lie. By the time Gregory finally told Sharon the truth, winter had settled over the eastern shore in that damp Maryland way that made cold feel heavier than it should. The baby was asleep upstairs after a difficult night. Wind rattled softly against the windows. Sharon sat at the kitchen table printing shipping labels while reheated coffee went untouched beside her laptop. Gregory stood near the doorway, holding his coat, like he wasn't fully sure he deserved to come inside. That had become their rhythm lately. He called before visiting now, knocked instead of walking in, waited for permission, around his own son. Sharon never told him to do that. He just started understanding boundaries after destroying them. "You can sit," she said finally without looking up. Gregory pulled out the chair across from her carefully. For a while, neither of them spoke. The printer hummed. Upstairs, the baby shifted briefly through the monitor static before settling again. Gregory looked older than he had 6 months earlier. Not physically weaker exactly, just stripped down somehow. Less polished. Like exhaustion had finally reached places money used to protect. "I spoke to outside counsel this morning," he said quietly. Sharon kept taping a shipping label onto a small package. "Okay, there's probably going to be another leak soon." That made her stop moving. Slowly, Sharon looked up. "What kind of leak?" Gregory rubbed one hand over his mouth. "The woman from the gala." The room went still immediately. Even now, hearing that subject aloud made Sharon's chest tighten reflexively. "What about her?" Gregory stared down at the table for a second before answering. "There was never an affair." Sharon blinked once. Nothing else. No dramatic reaction. Just stillness. Gregory continued carefully, like every word might cut both of them. Her name is Elise. She's an image consultant attached to one of the crisis firms handling the whistleblower investigation. Sharon's voice came out flat. What whistleblower investigation? Gregory finally looked at her directly. The board. The silence after that felt physically dense. Outside, wind pushed rain lightly against the windows. Sharon leaned back slowly in her chair. No, she said quietly. Start over. Gregory swallowed, and for the next 20 minutes, Sharon listened while her marriage became something stranger and uglier than ordinary betrayal. Board corruption, hidden sourcing deals, kickback structures buried inside overseas vendor contracts, executives leaking information internally while preparing to force Gregory out before regulatory investigations surfaced publicly. Gregory discovering enough evidence to trigger outside scrutiny. Then panic. Then strategy. Always strategy. Elise was supposed to help create distance, Gregory said carefully. If they thought we were separating already, it reduced leverage against you and the baby. Sharon stared at him, like she no longer recognized the language coming out of his mouth. You publicly humiliated your pregnant wife to protect me. It wasn't supposed to happen publicly. Oh, Sharon said softly. Well, that fixes everything. Gregory flinched. The teleprompter was altered. And you still said it. His face tightened immediately. That was the part he had no defense for. Sharon stood abruptly and walked toward the sink because suddenly sitting still felt impossible. Her entire body buzzed with anger, too complicated to release cleanly. Gregory stayed seated. I thought, if I controlled the narrative first, that's the problem. Sharon turned around sharply enough that her voice cracked. You always think control is the answer. The baby monitor hissed softly between them. Both of them lowered their voices automatically afterward. You let me stand there, Sharon whispered, in front of cameras, pregnant, humiliated. And the entire time you knew there wasn't even another woman. Gregory's eyes closed briefly. I know. No, you don't. Sharon pressed one trembling hand against the counter, because suddenly the betrayal had changed shape again. An affair would have at least been emotionally understandable. Ugly, painful, selfish, but human. This was Gregory turning her life into collateral damage for a strategy meeting. You made me public property, she said quietly. Gregory looked physically sick, hearing it phrased that way. I was trying to keep you safe. Sharon laughed once under her breath. The sound carried no humor whatsoever. That's what's terrifying about you sometimes. Gregory's jaw tightened. What does that mean? It means you hurt people while convincing yourself you're protecting them. The words landed hard because they were true. Gregory lowered his gaze immediately afterward. For the first time since arriving, he looked less like a billionaire businessman and more like a man finally cornered by his own emotional habits. You think because your intentions aren't cruel, Sharon continued, voice shaking, now from exhaustion more than volume, that the damage somehow hurts less. Gregory said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Upstairs, the baby cried suddenly through the monitor, sharp, tired, needing something immediately. Sharon wiped at her face angrily before moving toward the stairs. Gregory stood instinctively. I'll get him. No. The answer came fast. Gregory froze. Sharon looked at him from the bottom step, eyes red now despite how hard she was trying to stay composed. And when she spoke again, her voice sounded devastated in a way Gregory would remember for the rest of his life. It would have hurt less, she whispered, if you had just cheated on me. For almost a week after Gregory told her the truth, Sharon barely spoke to him unless it involved the baby. Pickup times, formula, doctor appointments. That was it. Gregory accepted the distance without arguing, because for once he understood explanations were not the same thing as repair. Sharon moved through her days, carrying a strange new kind of exhaustion. Not shock anymore. Shock had burned off. What remained was something heavier, disillusionment, because now she understood the worst thing Gregory had done was not betrayal in the ordinary sense. It was believing he had the right to decide how much truth she could survive. That realization sat quietly underneath everything. One Thursday afternoon, while the baby slept upstairs and freezing rain tapped against the windows, Sharon answered a call she almost ignored from an unfamiliar Maryland number. Sharon Whitmore? The surname still sounded foreign to her sometimes. Yes? This is Daniel Mercer. I worked with your father years ago at Annapolis Systems. Sharon sat up straighter immediately. Nobody mentioned Leonard unexpectedly very often anymore. Oh. Okay, I hope this isn't inappropriate, Daniel said carefully. I saw your business online. Sharon glanced automatically toward the kitchen table, covered in half-packed jewelry orders. People keep finding that somehow. Daniel laughed softly. Internet's strange now. There was a brief pause. Then his tone changed slightly. Your father used to talk about traceability constantly. Authenticity, provenance systems, making sure luxury goods could always be connected back to origin. Sharon frowned. That sounds like him. He filed preliminary patent work before he got sick. Something inside Sharon stilled immediately. What? Daniel cleared his throat. I always wondered what happened to the filings after he passed. Honestly, most of us assumed the family never knew. Sharon looked toward the plastic storage bins still stacked near the hallway. No one ever told us anything about patents. That doesn't surprise me, Daniel admitted. Your father wasn't exactly self-promotional. That part made Sharon smile faintly, despite herself. Leonard could spend 3 hours explaining engineering details, but became visibly uncomfortable if somebody complimented him too directly. Daniel continued carefully. The reason I'm calling is because your jewelry authentication language online reminded me of the old prototype work. Sharon's stomach tightened slightly. What prototype work? Anti-counterfeit verification systems. Physical traceable markers embedded into luxury products. Harder to duplicate, easier to verify. For a second, Sharon forgot about the printer humming beside her, forgot about the rain outside, forgot even the exhaustion sitting permanently inside her bones lately. All that was real. Oh, absolutely. Daniel sounded surprised she didn't know. Your father was ahead of people on that. Timing just wasn't right yet. After the call ended, Sharon stood motionless in the kitchen for nearly a minute before walking toward the storage bins. Her hands shook slightly while opening Leonard's notebooks again. This time she looked differently. Not emotionally. Technically, diagrams, material notes, prototype references, licensing correspondence. She barely understood at first glance. Her father's careful handwriting filled page after page with systems designed to verify authenticity through embedded identification structures. A thing should always be traceable to the hands that made it. Sharon sat down slowly. Oh my God, she whispered. Upstairs, the baby stirred through the monitor, but Sharon couldn't stop turning pages. That evening, Gregory arrived during bath time, carrying diapers and groceries Sharon had not asked for. He paused immediately in the kitchen doorway when he saw papers spread across almost every surface. What happened? Sharon barely looked up. My father had patent filings. Gregory blinked once. What kind of filings? Authentication systems. Anti-counterfeit technology. Now he moved closer. Not controlling. Curious. Sharon handed him several pages silently. Gregory read for almost a full minute before lifting his eyes again. These are legitimate. Something defensive rose instantly inside Sharon. What does that mean? It means this isn't hobbyist material. Gregory tapped one page carefully. This could actually scale commercially. Sharon crossed her arms automatically. Funny how people suddenly respect things once money attaches itself to them. Gregory absorbed the hit quietly because he deserved it. I didn't mean it like that. I know how you meant it. The baby started crying upstairs. Neither moved immediately. Then Gregory asked softly, Can I get him? Sharon hesitated. Not long, but long enough for both of them to feel it. Finally, she nodded, once. Gregory disappeared upstairs, while Sharon remained at the kitchen table, staring at Leonard's work. For the first time since the gala, something unfamiliar began replacing survival inside her. Not revenge, not reconciliation, momentum. Over the next few weeks, Sharon started meeting virtually with intellectual property attorneys recommended through Daniel Mercer's old engineering network. The process moved slowly and involved more paperwork than glamour, which oddly reassured her. Nothing magical was happening. This was inheritance, technical work, legal structure, discipline, the same things Leonard respected. At night, Sharon integrated pieces of the authentication concepts into her jewelry branding, small verification systems, serialized craftsmanship records, authenticity registration for custom vow pieces. Customers loved it, not because it sounded luxurious, because it sounded honest. And slowly, without fully noticing it happening, Sharon stopped building her business just to emotionally survive Gregory. She started building because for the first time in years, she could clearly see her own value, separate from being chosen, loved, protected, or betrayed by anyone else. The call came just after 6 in the morning, while Sharon was heating a bottle and trying to answer customer emails one-handed. Her son had finally stopped crying after a rough night teething. The kitchen smelled faintly like formula and burnt toast. Outside, February wind rattled weakly against the windows while shipping boxes crowded half the dining area. Sharon almost ignored the unknown international number. Almost. Mrs. Whitmore? The voice carried a clipped professionalism that made her stomach tighten immediately. This is St. Mary's Medical Liaison Services calling regarding Gregory Whitmore. For one brief second, Sharon thought someone had died. Her body reacted before logic did, pulse jumping, fingers tightening around the bottle too hard. What happened? There was a vehicle accident outside Geneva 3 days ago. 3 days ago. Something cold moved through Sharon's chest. He's alive? Yes, ma'am. Stable. But there was a concussion involved and some post-traumatic memory disruption. He listed you as emergency family contact. Sharon stared at the countertop silently, while her son fussed softly in the high chair behind her. 3 days. Nobody told her for 3 days. Not Gregory, not his lawyers, not the company. The old anger arrived immediately beside the fear. Because even now, after everything, Gregory still moved through crisis like a man trying to privately absorb impact before allowing anyone else near it. Is he alone? Sharon asked quietly. There was a small pause. Yes. That answer stayed with her long after the call ended. Alone, not surrounded by investors or assistants or polished executives, just alone in some foreign hospital recovering from a crash while his entire life continued collapsing across oceans. Sharon hated that the image hurt her. The next few weeks filled with fragmented updates. Gregory remained overseas longer than expected because recovery became complicated. Concussion symptoms, migraines, memory gaps around certain stretches of the investigation timeline. Nothing dramatic enough to erase accountability, just enough damage to strip away the illusion that he could out-strategize consequences forever. Meanwhile, the corporate fallout intensified publicly. Board resignations, federal inquiries, financial publications, dissecting Gregory's leadership failures with the same appetite gossip blogs once used on Sharon's humiliation. A business channel played clips from the gala beside headlines about executive misconduct and governance breakdown. This time, Gregory looked smaller on screen, not powerful, just tired. One afternoon, Renee walked into the rental carrying coffee and glanced toward the muted television. Damn, she muttered softly. They turned on him fast. Sharon didn't answer immediately, because she knew that world. Wealth respected control more than loyalty. The second Gregory looked vulnerable. People who once praised him professionally started speaking about him like damaged inventory. Still, sympathy felt dangerous. Sharon had spent too many months rebuilding herself emotionally to romanticize his suffering now. Then the investment offer arrived. At first it looked suspiciously generous. Patient capital, non-voting structure, no hidden control provisions, flexible repayment schedule, operational support for expansion and childcare infrastructure. If Sharon scaled manufacturing, her attorney reviewed the documents twice. This is unusually clean, he admitted during a video call. Honestly, whoever structured this either respects your business deeply or feels guilty about something. That sentence bothered Sharon immediately. 3 weeks later, she discovered why. She had stopped by Annapolis for a licensing consultation tied to Leonard's patent filings when she saw Gregory unexpectedly sitting alone near the marina afterward. No driver, no security, just Gregory in a dark wool coat, drinking coffee from a paper cup while staring out at gray water. For a second, Sharon genuinely didn't recognize him emotionally. He looked thinner, not performatively humbled, actually worn down. Gregory stood carefully when he saw her approaching. I wasn't expecting you. That makes two of us. The wind off the harbor cut sharply between buildings. Sharon folded her arms tighter across her coat. You invested in my company. Gregory's silence answered fast enough. Anger surged through her immediately. You don't get to do that. I wasn't trying to control anything. You secretly funded my business after publicly destroying my life, and somehow you think that's better? Gregory looked down briefly. I structured it so you could reject me without hurting the company. That's not the point. His jaw tightened slightly. I know, but Sharon wasn't sure he actually did, because even now Gregory still instinctively moved through love by arranging outcomes instead of surrendering honesty. First, that business is mine, Sharon said quietly. Do you understand me? Mine. I know it is. No, she snapped. You understand ownership legally. I'm asking if you emotionally understand what it took for me to build something that didn't depend on you. The harbor wind carried silence between them. Gregory looked exhausted suddenly. Not defensive, just exhausted. I'm trying, he admitted quietly. That sentence landed differently than his old ones used to. Not polished, not strategic, just painfully incomplete. Sharon studied him for a long moment, then noticed something unsettling. For the first time since she met Gregory Whitmore, he no longer looked like a man convinced he could control what happened next. And strangely enough, that frightened her almost as much as the old version did. Gregory did not ask for forgiveness after that day in Annapolis. That was the first thing Sharon noticed. The old Gregory would have explained, carefully, reasonably. He would have built a verbal structure around his intentions until even his apologies sounded like legal arguments. But after the investment confrontation, something in him seemed to stop reaching for defense as quickly. Instead, he started showing up smaller, not weak, smaller. The following Saturday, he arrived at the rental house outside Chestertown wearing jeans, an old Navy jacket, and sneakers Sharon had never seen before. He carried diapers in one hand and a paper bag of breakfast sandwiches in the other. Denise opened the door before Sharon could. For 3 full seconds, she just looked at him. Gregory stood there quietly. Good morning, Denise. Denise took the bag from his hand and looked inside. You bring food or guilt? Gregory blinked once. Both, probably. That almost made Sharon laugh from the hallway, but she held it in. Denise did not smile. Honesty is cute when it's late. Then she stepped aside. Gregory accepted that too. No clever answer, no wounded expression, no performance of humility for sympathy. That became the strange new rhythm. He came when he said he would come. He left when Sharon said it was time. He changed diapers badly at first and did not pretend otherwise. He learned which bottles upset the baby's stomach, which blanket helped him nap, which gas drops worked, and which cry meant hunger instead of frustration. One afternoon, Sharon found him standing in the kitchen bouncing their son against his shoulder while reading the instructions on a formula container like it was a merger document. You're overthinking milk, she said. Gregory looked up, tired and serious. I've discovered milk is very complicated. Despite herself, Sharon smiled. It disappeared quickly, but not before he saw it. He didn't comment. That mattered. The workshop had moved out of the kitchen by then, into a small converted garage behind the rental. It smelled like metal, cardboard, coffee, and the faint lavender soap Sharon used on her hands after polishing pieces. Gregory started helping there too, though Sharon made it painfully clear he was not needed in any glamorous capacity. You can sweep, she said the first day, handing him a broom. He looked at the floor. Okay, no advice. I wasn't going to. Gregory. He stopped, then nodded. No advice. So he swept. Metal dust, scraps of wire, packaging pieces, the kind of low, repetitive work nobody photographed. The first few times, his movements looked awkward, like his body still expected assistance to appear around inconvenience, but he kept doing it. A week later, Sharon found him taping shipping boxes while their son slept in a portable crib near the workbench. Gregory's tape line was crooked. She stared at it. He followed her gaze. I know, he said. I'm improving emotionally faster than logistically. Sharon shook her head, but the corner of her mouth moved. Trust did not return in big emotional scenes. It returned, if that was even the right word, in uncomfortable repetition. At pediatric appointments, Gregory sat in waiting rooms surrounded by tired parents, diaper bags, crying toddlers, and daytime television playing too loudly from a wall-mounted screen. No private concierge doctor, no influence, no special entrance. Once, when the nurse asked for the baby's date of birth and insurance information, Gregory looked toward Sharon automatically. She raised an eyebrow. He pulled out his phone. "I have it," he said quickly. He did. That mattered too. Therapy was harder. Not because Gregory resisted going, but because he came back quieter afterward. Some visits left him visibly unsettled. He would sit in his car outside Sharon's rental for several minutes before coming inside, like he needed to put himself back together before entering a room where excuses no longer worked. One evening, after dropping off diapers, he stood near the porch while Sharon held the baby wrapped against her chest. "My therapist said something today," Gregory said. He looked embarrassed, which was not an emotion she was used to seeing on him. "She said I confused secrecy with sacrifice." Sharon adjusted the baby's blanket. "She's not wrong." "No." The porch light buzzed above them. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked twice and stopped. Gregory looked at his son's sleeping face. "I used to think if I carried the ugly parts alone, that made me good." Sharon did not soften immediately. She was too tired for neat redemption. Sometimes it just makes everyone else carry consequences they didn't choose. Gregory nodded slowly. "I know that now. You know it today," Sharon said. "Knowing it forever is different." He took that in without arguing. For a while, that was enough. Then, on a cold Monday afternoon, everything they had been carefully rebuilding cracked open again. Sharon was in the workshop finishing a custom pendant when Gregory's phone rang. He answered casually at first, standing beside the packing table. Then his face changed. The color drained from it so fast Sharon set down her tool. "What?" Gregory held up one hand, listening. Then he said, very carefully, "Say that again." Sharon stood. The baby was supposed to be at daycare for 3 more hours. Gregory looked at her, and something in his expression made her body go cold before he spoke. "Someone picked him up," he said. Sharon stared at him. "What do you mean, someone?" Gregory was already reaching for his keys, his voice tight with a fear that no longer sounded controlled. "They used an authorization code from my old security system." Sharon did not remember the drive to the daycare clearly afterward. Only pieces. Gregory, running a red light somewhere near Route 213, her own breathing turning uneven, the sound of the daycare director apologizing over and over while Sharon stood frozen in the lobby clutching the diaper bag she had grabbed automatically on the way out the door. "He had the authorization," the woman kept saying shakily. "The system cleared it. We thought—" "You thought wrong," Sharon snapped, then immediately hated herself because the woman looked terrified too. But fear had already taken over Sharon's body completely by then. Not ordinary fear. Animal fear. The kind that makes your hands numb. Police arrived within minutes. Questions blurred together. Gregory moved through the chaos differently this time. Not controlling the room, not performing authority, just answering everything directly and immediately. "No," he said when an officer asked whether former company personnel still had active access points tied to his old security infrastructure. "But they may still have copied credentials from before we shut portions down." "Who specifically?" Gregory gave names, real names. No hesitation. That was new too. An hour later, while Sharon sat shaking in a back office clutching her phone so hard her wrist hurt, Gregory walked in looking pale. They found the vehicle. Sharon stood so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Where?" "Near Centerville." "Is he okay?" Gregory swallowed. "They believe so." "Believe." Sharon pressed both hands against her mouth immediately because she could not survive another uncertain sentence. For the next 40 minutes, nobody asked her to calm down again. Gregory made sure of that. Every time someone started using careful public language tones around her, he interrupted. "She needs direct answers. Not protected answers, not managed answers. Direct ones." By sunset, their son was recovered safely at an abandoned marina property connected to one of the former board fixers under investigation. The man had panicked after federal pressure, intensified, and apparently believed Gregory still possessed unreleased evidence that could destroy what remained of several careers. The kidnapping lasted less than 5 hours. Emotionally, it altered everything. Sharon cried so hard holding her son afterward that her entire body shook. He was frightened, but physically unharmed. Small hands gripping her sweatshirt while she sat in the hospital examination room refusing to let anyone else carry him. Across from her, Gregory looked wrecked, not emotionally polished, not billionaire composed, destroyed. Because the system he built, the secrecy, the private networks, the layers of controlled information, had finally reached into his own child's life. And this time, there was nowhere left to hide behind intention. Late that night, after Denise finally took the baby home so Sharon could breathe for a moment, Gregory sat beside her outside the hospital entrance under harsh fluorescent lights. Cold wind moved through the parking lot. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Gregory said quietly, "I'm done." Sharon looked at him. With what? All of it. His voice sounded exhausted in a permanent way now. The board, the leverage, the evidence strategy. Every piece of it. Sharon stared ahead at the empty road. "You can't undo what happened. I know, and saying sorry doesn't fix this either. I know that too." Gregory rubbed both hands over his face slowly before continuing. "I spent years believing if I controlled enough variables, I could protect the people I loved." Sharon stayed silent. "And all I actually did," he said, voice rough now, "was make everyone live inside my fear. That landed because it was finally honest, without sounding rehearsed. No strategy inside it, just truth." The next morning, Gregory held a press conference outside the company headquarters in Bethesda. No dramatic staging, no curated sympathy. He looked directly into cameras and publicly released the remaining evidence tied to the corruption investigation, waived control protections connected to the board fight, and announced he was surrendering his remaining controlling stake. Then, halfway through the statement, Gregory stopped reading entirely. For the first time in years, he spoke without preparation. "I broke my vows long before the gala," he said quietly. "Not because I loved someone else, because I chose control over honesty." Repeatedly, the room went silent. Gregory continued, "Anyway, I convinced myself secrecy was protection, that if I carried difficult things alone, I was being strong. But strength without truth becomes manipulation eventually. And the people who pay for it are usually the people who trusted you most." Sharon watched the broadcast later from the workshop while her son slept nearby. No part of her melted watching it. That wasn't what forgiveness looked like anymore. Forgiveness came slower than emotion, slower than apology. It came through Gregory continuing to show up afterward, without asking for instant absolution. Months later, under a quiet eastern shore sky near the water, Sharon stood beside Gregory again during a small vow renewal ceremony, with almost nobody present besides Denise, Renee, and their sleepy son squirming restlessly in Gregory's arms. No ballroom, no investors, no cameras, just wind moving softly through tall grass near the shoreline. Gregory looked at Sharon before speaking his vows, and for once he did not sound polished. He sounded careful. "I promise," he said quietly, "to tell the truth before it becomes expensive." Sharon's eyes filled immediately, not because the marriage had become perfect, because finally, after everything, it sounded real. And when she answered him, her voice carried all the exhaustion, grief, strength, and hard-earned tenderness of the woman she had become without him, and eventually beside him again. Not rebuilding the old marriage, building a truthful one. If this story stayed with you, let it remind you of something most people learn too late. Love does not fall apart all at once. It breaks slowly inside silence, inside pride, inside the things people hide, while convincing themselves they're protecting the people they love. And sometimes the deepest betrayal is not cheating. Sometimes it's making someone carry pain they never agreed to carry. Sharon and Gregory didn't survive because they ignored what happened. They survived because they finally stopped performing strength and started telling the truth, even when the truth cost them comfort, reputation, and control. So before you leave, ask yourself honestly, have you ever stayed quiet about something that slowly damaged a relationship you cared about? Or have you ever had to rebuild yourself after someone else's choices broke your trust? If this story touched you in any way, leave a comment below. I read them carefully, and your stories matter here too. And if you enjoy emotionally real stories about love, betrayal, healing, family, and second chances, subscribe to Mr. Kingswell Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Until next time, protect the people you love with honesty, not silence.